Welcome to this webinar. We are here today to talk through how to prove SEO business value with call tracking. Quick agenda. We will do some moderator and speaker intros, then we'll jump into a hosted Q&A, and then at the end, we will have time for an audience Q&A. So if you are out there watching and you have some questions for our speakers, just pop them in the chat and we will get to those at the end. I am Ryan Hogan. I am a demand generation manager here at CallRail. I am going to be moderating this session. I am joined by Billy Watts. Billy Watts is the SEO manager at CallRail. Billy has over 10 years of experience coming before CallRail was at TechTarget, where he managed technical SEO for their international network of over 100 websites designed to glean B2B purchase intent data from their large audience of tech buyers. So we're super glad to have Billy here. And of course, our speaker, Michael King. Michael King is the founder and managing director of iPullRank and has an extensive background in coordinating creative, strategy, technical, and paid media teams to achieve long-term client goals. He's done this for several Fortune 500 companies, including LG, Citi, Cartier, General Mills, Ralph Lauren, Hawaiian Airlines, and many, many others. Mike has also contributed to Moz, Search Engine Watch, Unbounce, Distilled, and is considered one of the premier thought leaders in SEO, inbound marketing, and owned media as a whole. Mike is also a sought-after speaker and has made appearances both domestically and internationally at conferences such as SMX, MozCon, Link Love London, SES New York, just to name a few. So we are very honored to have you today and are really looking forward to hearing and learning from you today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Billy to go through our Q&A.
Awesome. Yes, super honored to have Mike King here today. He's been doing amazing things for a long time. I've personally been inspired from and learned a lot, so I'm excited to be talking with him today. Mike's one of those people who's always sharing something unique and actionable. So I'm excited. Let's jump into this. We're going to talk about so how can we measure business value, some reporting questions, and how that ties into SEO today. So I just want to kind of start off with a simple question. Why is buy-in for SEO difficult?
I think it's generally because of one or two reasons. One, someone doesn't understand SEO, or two, they don't know how to really measure SEO. And so when I say that they don't understand it, they may understand other channels a bit better. Like they're like, okay, I'm really used to doing, direct marketing, or I'm really used to doing paid channels. I know if I put $10 in, I get $100 out. But with SEO, I could spend $1,000 or several thousands of dollars and not see a direct impact. And then also this idea of it not being, or they don't really know how to measure it. They may see that rankings have increased, traffic has increased, but they may not have their measurements set up in such a way where they know which channels really effectively drove the business impact. Like they may not have the right conversion goals set up, or they may not have a real deep dive into their segmentation and their analytics and so on. And so they may not know what SEO is doing. A lot of people look at analytics as like a last click thing, and they're not understanding the interplay between channels, right? Like maybe a user ultimately buys something from you or tries out your service because they sign up to the mailing list, and then they ultimately saw a bunch of emails, clicked a few times, and then they ultimately bought something, right? But what got them to that mailing list? Was it you bought a mailing list and you spammed them to death? Probably not. They probably found you through search first, and they signed up to the mailing list from there. So really having a good understanding of the business value of what organic search does is something that a lot of businesses, especially smaller businesses, don't really have a good understanding of. But I've also seen it where a lot of large businesses, their attribution model is so, doesn't really make sense. It doesn't reflect what people are actually doing. And so it's difficult for you to say like, hey, let's spend money on SEO when you don't know what SEO can get you.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm picking up on a lot of stuff there. Attribution, segmentation. This stuff is so important for measuring our impact when it comes to SEO efforts. Cool. So what are some of the common reasons that businesses, small businesses, large businesses, even local ones, that they might undervalue SEO? And it kind of ties in, I guess, to the last question, but what are some reasons they might undervalue?
Yeah, and like you said, I think it goes back to, again, this idea of measurement, right? Like, so if you're a business who, your primary business comes in through phone calls, and you're not tying your SEO measurement to phone calls, and you're like, hey, my phone is ringing all the time. I don't know why, but it's ringing. And so let's say you're also running like TV ads. You're like, oh, it's ringing because of the TV ads. That may or may not be true, right? And so again, it just really comes back to more effective measurement of what's going on. And I think a lot of business owners, small business owners, they're just like, well, I know how well my business is doing because I'm looking at, my QuickBooks or whatever it is. And they're not really thinking about the individual channels. And again, how those channels play with each other. So, if depending on how your stuff is set up, you may not have detail around the intelligence of what is causing things to perform. And so again, unless you have the right measurement in place, you may undervalue any given channel, whether it's SEO, whether it's social media, whether it's email. And so I think a lot of it just comes back to the lack of education, or at least maybe just like the lack of taking the time to figure out like what is impacting my business.
Yeah, I mean, even before you start doing any SEO, you got to have the analytics set up right. You got to have those conversions tracked, or else how are you going to know if you're doing anything right? So we do the work. We're getting search rankings. We know we're talking about this. You can't really. They're not worth a whole lot unless you can translate them into business value. So what are some of the ways that you've been able to create business value out of that organic search channel, and then some of the ways you're able to track that business value?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this comes early in the SEO work. The way that we approach things is very much like segment driven. So when we do our keyword research, we're doing it at the persona level. It's not just like, oh, there's a bunch of keywords and a lot of people are searching for them. Cool, let's optimize for that. We're trying to figure out, how do these keywords align with the people that we're trying to target in the audience? And then who is the person behind the visit? So as early as that meta description and page title, we get them to click on the right thing rather than just driving more traffic. Because like this says, if we get better rankings and it doesn't do anything, like here's a good example, right? Like I make music, and I thought it was a good idea for me to make my website rank #1 for best rapper ever. And it was actually terrible. It was terrible because it was all people looking for like Lil Wayne. So like my bounce rate was terrible. My traffic was up a lot, but it didn't help me as a musician trying to like sell records. And so by that same token, we want to make sure that we are optimizing for the right keywords, for the right people that are actually interested in what your business ultimately drives. And so we also do our measurement in a segmented way as well. So like if you're using Google Analytics, you can segment based on personas as well, because they have the demographics and interest data in there. And so you can set up those segments where it reflects that audience. You can see what that search traffic is doing. And so what we tend to see is that different segments of the audience perform in different ways. They have different interests and so on. And so that gives you a lot of business intelligence as to like what we want to do with our content and things of that nature. But again, it really comes back to what matters to the business. So we're talking about, a local business. Again, do we want people to call us? Do we want people to submit forms? Do we want people to sign up for a mailing list? All those things need to be tied to the channel that they come from. And then you have to see what the interplay is between those channels. So if we find out that, downstream, a lot of people convert from the mailing list, like I said before, but upstream, those people, like for the most part, the people that do convert from the mailing list are the people that came from organic search. That tells us that first touch is where we need to invest more in so we get more people downstream to convert on that mailing list. So it really just comes down to what are the business objectives? How do we align the channel with those business objectives? And then how do we measure the right things to see how that channel is performing? And again, I think that a lot of it comes back to, is the goal to get someone in the store? Is the goal to get someone on the phone? Is the goal to get someone to give you an email address? And then you just optimize accordingly.
Awesome. Yeah. Keep hearing segmentation. I'm loving it. Awesome. Some really cool little ideas there that you shared. So what are some of like the solid KPIs that you're tracking? Are there specific things that you really start with on everyone, or is there anything that people are missing or that they really need to make sure that they're including?
Yeah. And I'm going to start to sound like a broken record. The conversion goals are the number one, right? Like we can talk about the channel, we can talk about rankings, we can talk about things from Google Search Console, like pulling impressions and average ranking and click-through rates and so on. I look at those as like the levers that we can control, because if we're talking about, okay, let's improve the click-through rate, well, then we got to be looking at page titles and metadata and what the alignment between keywords and content are, right? But what the business cares about is, again, how many people are coming to the store, how many people are buying something, how many people are calling in, how many people are signing up for the mailing list. So what we want to do is align with those business objectives first and have that be on the first page of the report. Here's how organic search impacted that. And then as we go in deeper, we start to say, okay, here is how content is performing in this channel. And then here are the assisted conversion, the multi-channel funnels, basically. Like, okay, here are the funnels that included organic search, and here's how they're performing. And then we start to get into like the basic SEO things, like here's your rankings, and again, segmented by different groups, by different personas, by different keyword categories, so that we have intelligence as to how these different things are performing. Because let's say you're like a store, right? Like let's say you're an electronics store. You don't want to just be looking at all of your rankings. You know, look at how TVs are performing versus how radios. Do people still use radios? Radios are performing, how cell phones are performing, because that gives you a sense of like, oh, I need to invest more time into this one because this is one that is yielding better performance for us or not better performance for us. And so I'm a firm and big believer on segmenting everything, because if you just look at everything broadly, it doesn't give you actionable insights. It just tells you like things are happening, right? But if you then dig into the individual segments, it tells you like, oh, here's where I need to focus. Here's a page that I need to improve. Here is, a part of the business that we need to be working on. The same way that a business will segment itself into business units, you should be segmenting your keywords and your content and so on, such that you have the ability to focus in on those items. So the dashboards, they tend to always be segmented in a way where it's like, what does a high level person, like a C-level person or a business owner, want to see versus what does a channel practitioner want to see? And so on that first dashboard, we'll have those executive summaries that'll say like, oh, we got 59 calls this week from organic search, or we got 100,000 visits, or we got keyword improvements in these keyword buckets and whatever, the high level things that they need to know. And then as we go in more detail, it gets more specific around what are the things that you actually control so that you can figure out where you want to optimize.
Awesome. I love it. I love the segmentation. Assisted conversions is something I've been getting into a lot in the past year. I found it super valuable way to be measuring content.
Mm-hmm.
So talking a little bit about what we do here at CallRail, call tracking and phone call transcription, do you see any SEO opportunity from analyzing like phone calls coming into the business?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is so many interesting things happening in this type of like natural language processing space super excited to see that y'all are incorporating that into the platform and so on. And I think there's a lot of value here. One, you can get a sense of what the trends are that people are asking about in these calls and so on, and then use that to inform keyword research, use that to inform content creation so that you can answer those questions on the website, right? And so
Exactly.
you get a more qualified caller when they actually call you. And then there's also just the aspect of being able to identify like common objections or common things that you've got to have your salespeople answering for, right? Like, so let's say there's like a piece of sales collateral that you may need for these types of things, so you can already arm your salespeople with, and they can be like, oh, okay, cool. Well, I can anticipate you're going to answer this or ask this, and you're going to have a really good pre-baked answer for it. And then there's the other aspect of like, just from a customer service perspective, like if there are customer service calls that are happening, again, if there's are common issues that are coming up, whether that's with your product, with your service, that gives you intelligence as a business owner or as a manager on things that you need to fix. And also gives you some definitive data that you can take to your stakeholders, like, yo, this isn't just a problem that I've made up in my head. This is one that our customers are actually having. So I'm really excited to see, those types of advancements.
Cool. Yeah, we've got some really cool features in our conversation intelligence product where you can analyze phone calls at scale. You can look for specific keywords. You can use combinations of those to score calls and score leads. We've got even some cool things like a word cloud that'll show you like, these are the words that are said the most out of call. You really get some interesting insights out of some of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think another part of it is like being able to tell if it was a successful call or not, right? Like, and I think all these features that you have make it really easy to do that. Because in the past, we'd have to have like some sort of feedback loop where it's like, hey, client, was that a good call or a bad call? Because all you see in analytics is like, oh, yeah, we had a number of calls this month. Well, were they calls that yielded closes or not? And so this technology really allows us to close the loop. So I think that's a really good way to tie SEO back to like business intelligence rather than just like the channel metrics that are available.
Awesome. Yeah. What are your thoughts on NAP consistency? I mean, everyone knows this is super important for local businesses. In some cases, we're using call tracking numbers that display dynamically on your site. How can we ensure that call tracking doesn't interfere with this signal for Google?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a good call tracking software knows to account for Google. I think in the past, a lot of these types of softwares didn't really think about it. They're just like, cool, we're going to switch the number and that's it. And a lot of it was the expectation that Google couldn't see JavaScript, but that has changed significantly over the years. So, the right solution, which I believe CallRail does this, it accounts for the fact that when Googlebot comes, it's not going to switch the number. So it doesn't have a NAP consistency problem. And so really what you want to make sure that you're doing is like not putting, inconsistent numbers all over the place. Like if you're going to put a number in Google My Business, make sure it's also the number that's on the website. And as long as your call tracking solution doesn't switch the number for Googlebot, you're all set. Otherwise, what happens is you have that inconsistency and it may yield poorer performance in local search.
Yeah. And we actually have a really cool solution specifically for Google My Business where we recommend using a call tracking number as your primary number, and then your mainline number, that's your consistent number, as your alternate number. And we found that works perfectly fine for Google My Business.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's all about consistency. It doesn't matter which number it is, as long as it's the same everywhere.
Tying it together, yeah. Cool. Are there SEO tactics that work for small businesses the same as enterprise level companies? You've been working for a lot of big enterprise companies. Like, I know everybody's different. It always depends. But are there similar things that work for small versus big?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the content aspect works for everybody, right? Like if you make content that is valuable, that your audience wants, that ultimately yields links, and is very much dialed in against the user intent and is mapped across the user journey. That's the same exact approach that we take at the enterprise, the same exact approach that we take at the small business level when we work with them as well. And you know, the link building tactics tend to be very similar as well. Aside from the fact that large businesses will have PR teams that you can say, hey, make sure you get the link to, and then that scales a bit more as well. Excuse me. Another tactic that we see that works really well, and again, this kind of goes back to the intersection of content and link building, is building these like state of experiences. So let's say you are a company that sells, I don't know, let's say you sell pet insurance. I don't know if small businesses sell pet insurance, but as an example, you could just do like a state of pet insurance and do it every year. And the thinking is that what happens is when journalists search for pet insurance stats and so on, your thing comes up, and so they end up linking to it and referencing it in their articles. So you kind of naturally collect a lot of links by creating these state of experiences. So that's another good tactic that works well on both ends. And then it becomes the type of thing that you just like update every year and you just keep getting more links from.
Keep building more data.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think the content strategies can be similar. It's just like how large scale are you going for the enterprise versus how small scale are you going for a small business. But yeah, I think content works for everybody.
At some point, SEO is all about content, is always about content. There's somebody that said that, I can't remember. There's some quote somewhere about that, but
yeah, that's all you're doing is giving visibility to content. And so I never understand when people say like, oh, you do your SEO thing, we'll do the content. Like they have to be intermingled.
Yeah, exactly. Here's an easy one. What's the one thing everyone has to do right to win at search?
Have an accessible website.
That's what I was going to do.
You know, because if you build a website that Google can't see for whatever reason, like that just gets you out the game entirely. And so that's what people are saying when they say like, oh yeah, we'll do the content, you do the SEO. They're more talking about the technical aspects that needs to be done to make sure that your site is accessible. And you know, it's really not that difficult these days, especially if you're a smaller website. Like WordPress is fine. You know, you just throw a couple plugins in there, make sure that you've got a theme that's well built, and you're good to go. Just like keep making your content, making sure that you're linking between pages, make sure that you're getting external links to pages, and then you're all set. So yeah, just make sure you're accessible.
Yeah, I've been seeing some companies using like these content experience software where it's like promoting a content experience, but none of that experience is accessible for Google, which for me just is a loss of opportunity. When you're promoting that experience, you're not able to add any search signals. You're not able to add anything there. So that's one thing that I've seen that's people can do wrong. We've got a lot of agencies that work with CallRail. So I want to flip it a little bit and talk a little bit about agency stuff. You're an agency owner. I think it's 6 years.
Yeah, it'll be 7 years in August.
7 years in August. Incredible. Must have been an awesome experience. What surprised you the most about your journey so far?
What surprised me the most? I would say how important process is. And what I mean by that is I'm not really a process-oriented person like natively, because none of the places that I worked were like, here's our process, do it this way, that's it. And I've thrived in that. It's like, cool, I can come up with a way to do this that's creative and continues to interest me. Like if you ask me to do the same project twice, I'm going to do it differently both times. It may achieve the same result, but I will have gone a different way to do it and will have learned something in the process. The problem is a lot of people, in fact, most of the people that I've encountered don't really work that way. What they need is like, here's how we do it step by step. And so the importance of that has just been kind of drilled into me through this process of like trial and error. And, you know, really focusing in on that is what's allowed us to get to the next level and will continue to propel us forward. So it's just been a surprising thing for me because that wasn't my experience as an individual contributor.
I think we share the same viewpoint there. I kind of come at SEO the same way. I'm a little bit more of an art than a science, a little bit more creative, and yeah, you learn and you find stuff as you go. So I'm definitely with you there, and I'm also with you on seeing the importance of process too. So as far as your agency goes, has the way that you've priced and packaged your services evolved over the years? I think people might be interested in like how this works, and maybe they can apply some learnings that you've had around pricing and services.
So it hasn't changed much. Like the pricing has evolved somewhat where we identify like, oh, we're not charging enough for a thing. But for the most part, we've always done it in with the approach that we're selling deliverables rather than hours. And you know, because the thing is like when you sell hours, that's not really to the benefit of the client. It's like you're just kind of you're having to continue to show activity to maintain whatever level of spend they're spending on you, right? And so, you know, it doesn't really create the environment where we're talking about the results, we're talking just about the activity. And so rather than doing that, what we do is we look at what the problems are. We say, okay, based on what your goals are and what we're seeing, here's a series of deliverables that we would recommend. And depending on how big you want to go, we'll have like 3 different options. And ultimately they choose which way they want to go. And then it's on us to drive results so that we can continue to grow the account rather than just being like, well, we got our 40 hours done this month, pay us for the 40 hours and keep paying us for 40 hours. It's more about us doing the thing that we agreed to and then using that to drive the result. And I find that to be a better relationship with the client. And also it doesn't like penalize us if we get something done faster because of the experience that we have.
I love that. I love the idea of pricing on deliverables. You know, obviously not everybody does that. And not checking boxes. I think I was listening to some of your stuff earlier this week, and that's one thing I picked up on. You said you don't like to check boxes.
Yeah, we're not into like the paint by numbers approach. And again, that's where like there's a bit of a conflict because it's like I want people to continue to be creative, and then some people need more structure around it and more process. But even within that process, I'm always laying out like, okay, you can go this way, you can go this way, or you can go this way. It's up to you to decide, you know, of those ways. And then also, if you have a more creative way to do it, this is a decision point where you can inject that. So it's very important to me that we're always like doing the best work possible, and not being, you know, scared of like, oh, well, we're going to run out of hours this month for this client. It's like, do what it takes to get the best work done. And that's it.
Nice. Can you share any secrets to recruiting or building your agency? How do you recruit, find the best talent and keep them on board?
That's I don't think I have any secrets there. You know, I just look for people who are really passionate about what they do, and in some cases have probably been underutilized in a previous role. And then I'm like, cool, well, you want to do this, we need this, let's meet here and let's just give you everything you need to get it done. You know, in some cases it doesn't work out because people say they want to do more or want to have ownership, but like in practice they don't actually want to. But for the people that does resonate with, you know, those are the people that I'll pull out all the stops and do whatever it takes to keep them. And I think part of it comes down to, you know, like identifying what they're motivated by, what they care about, and then, you know, giving them that. Like in some cases, it may be someone who wants to be bonus based on certain things, or someone that just wants to learn more about certain things or wants more support in things that they're passionate about. And for me, it's like, all right, let's figure out what that is and how we can make that work. I think at the end of the day, the retaining part or retention part of it is very much about like having the right ongoing conversation with people so that they feel supported and they feel like they can grow in their role. But the other part of it for agencies specifically is that it can be very difficult because it's typically expected like that, you know, for you to move up in your career, like your boss has to either get promoted or leave. And so we have two different tracks. We have the individual contributor track, which can continue to go up and is like compensated um, comparably to the people manager track, which also can continue to go up. So we don't want people to feel as though they're stuck just because like, oh, well, there's a manager above me and I can't go above that. So there's ways for people to go up on both sides. And I think that's another huge thing for retention for agencies as well.
Awesome. Those are some great tips, great general management tips too, to help anybody out.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. What do you attribute your success to? Do you have any words of wisdom to share with agency owners who are maybe early on in their journey?
Yeah, I would say thought leadership is the main thing for me. You know, because I came into SEO from music. Like I was a touring musician for 8 years. My background's in computer science, but like, you know, I come into a big agency and it's like, well, what have you been doing for 8 years? Cool, you can have this junior role. And I very quickly, you know, just once I got into thought leadership, it was like I was able to quickly catch up where I felt like I should be in my career. And it really just created more of a situation where I was choosing what I wanted to do rather than like just taking what I could get. So I would recommend anyone who is, you know, not just if you're starting an agency, but just your career in general, get involved in thought leadership, make a name for yourself. And it just really changes the conversation for whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, you've been a thought leader as long as I can remember. Early on in my career, I remember reading stuff from you, listening to talks from you back in 2012, maybe 2011 even.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to deep getting into it. So I always appreciated your approach to that.
Thank you.
Any books, people, resources that helped you out along the way?
Countless books. I read a ton. I mean, it's just the way I learn. Like a lot of people prefer, you know, in-person instruction or like a course or whatever. My primary way of learning is through books. So like to give you a list, it would take a long time. I would say that Crucial Accountability is a great book that I read recently. Also Crucial Conversations, another great book. There are books that everyone swears by that I also don't like. Like Good to Great, I think that book is horrible. Just kind of like how it's written, I didn't really enjoy it. It was a chore to get through. But you know, there's a lot of books like Thinking Fast and Slow. That was a really good one. The Art of SEO was a good one for me earlier in my career because, you know, I was doing SEO, but I didn't really feel like I knew what I was doing because everything was changing, right? And then you read a book that's like puts everything that you have in your head on the paper. You're like, oh, okay, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah,
yeah,
I love that.
And you know, there's just a lot of technical books that I read too. Like so, all the languages that I know as far as code, I learned from a book. It's not like an online thing. But as far as people, I've learned a lot from Rand Fishkin. I've learned a lot from you know, just like a lot of the people that were in my peer group when I was coming up, like Ross Hudgens, Ross Simmons, John Doherty, you know, Ali Gardner from Unbalanced. There's just a lot of people who just like the way they were moving, the way that they were doing things. I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. I want to do something like that, but my way. and everyone has always just been like a really good sounding board. So just the key takeaway from that is just like, find the people that are your tribe, find the people that are doing what you're trying to do, find the people that have an interest in what you're trying to do, and don't be hesitant to bounce ideas off of them, to just like ask them like, hey, how can you help them? And then they'll also help you. And don't do it for that reason, but it's just like how it works out.
Yeah.
Just having like that network of people that are like constantly just being like, yo, keep going. Like that is so helpful, because I came from an industry that was so like cutthroat and everyone trying to like get up over other people. This was such a refreshing breath of fresh air, where everyone's like doing stuff that's similar and they're just like sharing ideas and things like that and wanting to contribute to that. And then also people being excited about what you've done and trying to help you get to the next level. So, that's everything, like just building those relationships.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I love to look for people that are saying something a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
For that unique perspective is something that I really value. It can be harder to find, but I think when you find people with a unique perspective, they're smart, they're bringing some real value to the conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see your agency in the next 5 years? Where are you going?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started this agency, I'd already worked at 5 different agencies. I wasn't like, yo, let's start the world's greatest agency. I was like, I want to build a really amazing team, and then I want that team to be able to do anything. And when I say anything, I mean like if we want to build software and launch it, if we want to, buy websites and rehab them and take them to the next level, or if we want to, I don't know, start a clothing line. Like I want us to have all the people on the team that can do that. And so where I see us going in 5 years is like continuing to have the agency work that we do and using that as the propellant for some of these other projects. So rather than like going the whole VC, direction, going more in the direction of like continuing to be a bootstrap business that's profitable, and then using some of that profit towards some of these other ideas that we have going on. And so that stuff is starting to happen. Like we're working on a couple different software projects. We are working on a clothing line.
Nice.
And I have a book that I have coming out soon. So I want the team to be very involved in promoting that. And it's not just about my ideas. Like if there's a good idea from anybody on the team, I want us to be able to invest in that and then turn that into its own business. And then like potentially spin those off, right? And it's like, all right, whoever's idea that was, cool. We brought it to life. Now you run it. And you still have support, like you become an agency client, right? And we just continue to do that, and that's how empires are made.
That's so cool. Yeah, diversification. You're
Yeah.
spinning up new business lines. That's really cool. And I know that you've got a multi-talented team. I saw the work that you did on that movie that you created for MozCon this year. That was really cool. I read the story. If anyone hasn't seen it, look it up, check it out. It's
called Runtime.
A runtime, yeah.
Yeah.
Really cool thing. How the story about how you put it together too is cool.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We always look for creative ways to do something, like you said, like a little different, right? And when they asked me to speak at MozCon has historically been my favorite conference. It was the first conference I went to, in fact. And they were like, oh, we're going to be, virtual. And that's disappointing because, it's a big production. It's like having a conference at like Epcot Center or something like that. I don't know. And so I was like, all right, well, if it's going to be, pre-recorded and remote, let's use this medium as well as we can. Right. And I was like, let's make a movie. And so we made a movie. And the way I describe it to people is it's like Mr. Robot meets Batman, the animated series. And yeah, it's like a whole story wherein, I'm kind of like teaching someone how to beat this game. And so you also learn some of the SEO tactics that we use through the form of this movie and story. So it was a lot of fun. It was a bit of a harrowing experience because we ended up having to like do more faster than we thought, but we were really happy with how it came out, and we want to continue to do very interesting things like that moving forward.
Very cool. Well, that kind of concludes the questions that I had. Brian, do we have any questions come up from the audience?
We sure did. Yeah, we have time for a couple questions. So if you're watching at home and want to ask something of Michael King, now is your chance. But to get us started, Michael, how do you make sure that clients know the value of SEO?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, we come in and we take a look at, how their analytics is currently set up. So we get a sense of what their business goals as part of like our whole intake process. And then we look at analytics and see, how does this reflect what those business goals are? And then we do what we call a measurement plan. And we'll say like, okay, well, here are the things that we need to be measuring. Here's how we'll store them. Here's how we'll set up dashboards. And so that may include like, oh, well, why don't you have call tracking? Or why don't you have, your data going to a centralized repository so that we can have everything in one place and build these dashboards. And so that may mean like, okay, let's set up BigQuery, let's set up Google Data Studio and things like that. But the whole point is that we are showing them how to tie business value back to the SEO channel. And then we set it up in such a way where they can always look at it. And then on a monthly basis, we're setting up, the actual report. So like with the commentary, why we think things have happened, what we recommend doing to continue to improve, and just clarifying like, okay, these are all the levers. Here's how we get the business value out of this. So it's really about just like coming to the table and saying like, okay, here's how your measurement is, here's how it needs to be, and then pushing them along to see what that value is.
Yeah, that's great. I know sometimes it can just be getting all the right information in the right place in front of the right person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's huge. We have another question. We've seen a lot of people calling our clients from Google My Business rather than navigating to the site and using that number. How are you able to tell which of these calls are from organic search?
Yeah, that's difficult because again, we want those numbers to be consistent, and we don't want to put a number on GMB that's not going to be the one that's being shown on the actual website. So I'm not sure how you guys are solving this directly at CallRail, but in my experience, that's been kind of difficult to do.
We have built an integration for Google My Business that will manage this for you and make sure that it maintains the NAP consistency. So we're able to put the call tracking number into the primary phone number for Google My Business, and the alternate number is your mainline number that's consistent everywhere. So as long as Google has that consistent number there for reference, they can still connect everything, and you can set your primary to a call tracking number, and people will see that first. They'll be calling that number. You can tell through call tracking without ruining your app consistency who's calling in directly from GMB without visiting your website. So that's been a pretty cool thing we launched last year.
So the answer is use CallRail.
Sure. Mike, what advice would you have for a small business owner that is just kind of getting started with SEO? Where should they begin the process? Like, what's the first couple of things what kind of goals should they set for themselves?
Yeah, I would say, start just from like a guide, like Moz has the beginner's guide to SEO. It's a really good guide explaining how to do things. There's also learningseo.io by Aleda Solis, where she really just like curates all the best information from the best people about SEO and so on. But as far as goals, I would say one, just like do some keyword research. Start with a tool like either look in your Google Search Console to see what keywords you're ranking for right now, or use a tool like SEMrush or Ubersuggest so you can identify keywords that you could be ranking for, and then figure out how that aligns with your existing content. So if you want to, rank for a keyword like best plumber in Brooklyn, see if you have a page that really makes sense for best plumber in Brooklyn. If not, take a look, like search for that keyword and see what ranks for it, and then figure out, okay, how can I make my version of this page? And there's a lot of tools out there that can help you with that process of like writing in such a way where it's going to work well, not just for users, but also search engine. There's a tool called Phrase. SEMrush has a tool for this type of thing, like it's called the Writing Assistant. And basically you're going to want to write pages for your keywords, making sure that you're speaking to people first, but also accounting for the keyword usage so that search engines can, rank you for those keywords. And then
Market Muse is another one there. We love Market Muse.
yeah, Market Muse is a great one. That one's it's a very robust tool. I definitely would recommend that y'all check that out. But the bottom line is that once you've got the content aligned with keywords and also aligned with your audience, then you want to figure out like, okay, how do I get people to link back to my content? And the easiest way to do that is to make something awesome. So whether that's like a guide, so let's say you're talking about best plumber in Brooklyn. What maybe like a guide to summarizing your house or winterizing your house or something like that, having that on the site so that you can have an asset that people really want, they'll link to it. And so you can do some outreach to people that are either like in your area or your chambers of commerce or like other local businesses and say like, hey, can you link back to me? So those 3 buckets of things are going to be, your best places to start to get some value. But again, make sure you've got your measurement set up as well so you can effectively know how well things are going. So if you're not using crawl tracking, set up CallRail, getting on site so you can see like, okay, how many calls did SEO drive for me? So then I can ultimately see like, okay, well, I did these efforts. It drove, 30 calls. So that's going to further motivate you to continue to optimize and get more value out of SEO. But really it comes down to like knowing what people want, making something that people want, and then promoting the thing that people want so you can drive more traffic.
Cool. That's simple, right? Yeah. Okay, final question. Mike, where can people find you if they want to see what you're up to, if they want to work with your agency? Where can people track you down?
Yeah, we're at iPullRank.com. I'm at iPullRank on Twitter, Mike at iPullRank.com. Just feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate your time today. Super valuable conversation. I think I learned a lot. Hopefully people watching at home learned a lot as well. And really appreciate it, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Billy.